All right. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We'll kick off this first session of the BIM track here. Glad to have you. Maybe a few more folks will trickle in after they get their cup of coffee and muffin. But my name's Morgan Kessler, and I'll be your moderator today. A bit about me, I hail from the Federal Highway Administration. I'm over at the Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center that Craig gave a great presentation about this morning. I'm a research engineer, and I'd say I put about 30 or 40% of my research time into kind of this bigger BIM for infrastructure topic and digital twins. Title of the session today is Go Digital for Enhanced Project Delivery. And I'm excited to have what I thought was two, but three, rock star presenters today from the, big world of expanding BIM for infrastructure. Personally, when I think about enhancing project delivery, one of the things my mind goes to is this idea of leveraging the concept of digitalization, right? Not digital. Yeah. Essentially, in my mind, it's replacing a lot of these paper and manual processes we've had, over the decades with, employing the benefits of digital data, and especially in the context of digital models, which we'll kind of talk about today. Our presentations this morning will go over things like how digital data and processes enable collaborative workflows for managing schedules, conveying design intent, and avoiding construction problems, which we all like. So I don't think we're real crunched for time today. We're supposed to have 3 full presentations. We only have 2 today. So, I was originally going to say, the way it'll work is we'll let each speaker do their talk and hold our questions, for the last 10 minutes. But with this crowd today and 2 presentations, I think it'll be a little more spontaneous than that. So, if you guys are okay with it, folks could just ask questions as they come up. With that, let's get right into introducing our first presentation. We have 2 folks today from the University of Texas at Austin Center for Transportation Research. We have Juan Loayza and Cameron Schmeitz. And I'm sorry, I don't have Cameron's bio, but I do have Juan's, and I'll read it. Juan is a civil engineer from Peru, working now in Texas. He graduated from University of Texas in Construction Engineering and Project Management Master's Program in 2020. He's interested in BIM applications for management, construction, coordination, and the use of gaming engines for interaction development. He's been working as a research fellow at the University of Texas at Austin since 2021, giving support with BIM models for Texas Department of Transportation projects located in the Fort Worth area and including the I-35 expansion project. And when Juan isn't busy modeling TxDOT projects, he enjoys oil painting, playing drums, and traditional Peruvian percussion. So with that, let's welcome Cameron and Juan.
So my name is Juan Loayza. I present for the interaction that we as a Center for Transportation Research from UT Austin did for the Texas Department of Transportation. This model includes 2 different road projects, the SH-170 road and MT3C road, which is an I-35 expansion. We will show road and bridge construction interactions on the medium part of both projects. So Cameron will talk a little bit more about these 2 projects.
So the two projects that we have, you can see the map there in green is the I-35W, it's the Segment 3C expansion. It's a $950 million public-private partnership, so it will include managed toll lanes in the middle, and then we also have some direct connectors that connect into the SH-170 project shown in blue. And so the SH-170 project is a $100 million traditional design bid build project. So both are TxDOT projects, just delivered differently, and we have this interaction. And so because of the need for our managed lanes, to be delivered on time and have connection points from SH-170 to NT3EC, there was, some heartburn, some concern from our public-private partnership TxDOT team about making sure that SH-170's project was going to be open and have the availability for those managed lanes to come onto and use the SH-170 facility. They're going to be done pretty close to it, but we've got separate contractors. There's just a lot of interface and interaction that happens both physically and then also contractually, and so we really just don't want to have an impact on the toll lanes. And so, that's where the 4D visualization came in. Is we created our 3D visualization, and the 4D was really to look at are we going to have things coming in, being ready on time, and the projects are still ongoing. It looks like the main portion of the SH-170 main lanes that we need are going to be done. But as we get closer, looking at maybe some temporary, connections, or are they going to want to open first? Are we going to want to open first? And just how all that works. We think there's going to be, some continued use of these 4D models for the kind of, somewhat micro simulation as we get closer to these projects being done next fall. I think I just kind of covered all of that. So now I'm going to hand over to Juan. Juan did all of the beautiful modeling work on all this, and he's going to talk about how he did all that, and he did a great job.
Okay, so there's some project challenges. Project connection has different delivery schedules and different dates, so there are challenges over there. There's a necessity of a connection between them because of the design, and also because the NT3C part, that's part that belongs to the I-35, it's a toll road, so they need to start working on that in order to put it in function. There are not too many detour paths available, so once the roads are connected, they should be able to be active without interruption. The revenue for the NT3C project depends on the SH-170 opening. The modeling objectives are 3. It's because we're a research department, so it's not only like model for these guys there in the TxDOT, but also it's to increase our capabilities in order to have like tools to handle future projects. So our modeling objectives were the visualization of the connection of the corridors in a time-lapse sequence, the presentation of a detailed bridge construction sequence, and inclusion of realistic textures and surroundings. So for the 3D models, we obtain geometry from DGN files, and we added realistic textures for both projects. And for the schedules, we obtained the several schedule updates from physics that were given by the project team. Now the modeling process, first we obtain a 3D model, getting horizontal, vertical, and cross sections from the design team, and then we added the texture in 3ds Max. Then we proceed with the so-called resource generation. That's a way to organize the 3D objects that are imported in order to generate groups that will be assigned to different tasks in the next step. So the schedule import, we imported from P6, and we set the scenarios because we obtained 2 different schedules that belong to 2 different updates. And we perform the task assignment, that is that match between the 3D objects that are that belong to the resource and the actual activities. And then for the 4D modeling, we perform a little bit of animation in just a piece of equipment and some parts of the project, like objects, beams, slabs, in order to show a construction sequence. I'm going to show a video about that next. And finally, we proceed to render animations, and there are many ways to render the animations. Depends on what's needed. If we need like a general view, if we need like detailed view from project, or if we need a different schedule comparison between the updates. So this is the first animation we obtained. That's a variable speed interaction that allows us to watch the construction sequence. It includes a detailed bridge construction sequence. We use different speed animations in order to show detailed activities such as beam placement, retaining walls, bridge construction, and also road construction. All those components have detailed textures and added surroundings. So we were able to add some filling material behind the retaining walls, and also we were able to animate cranes and show a little bit of like a detailed construction in the middle of a big like project construction or interaction. So we were able to switch between cameras, but trying to show like the pieces that are being in construction in screen. Now we are going to notice the difference between this animation and the next one that I'm going to show now. So yeah, well, you can see that after the bridge is finished, then the road construction continues, and you can spot like several layers, like the construction sequence for both connectors. NT3C is in the bottom, and the SH170 parts in the top. Now it's pavement layers, and finally the concrete pouring for the pavement. So that's the final frame for this model. And this is just a general 4D model that shows the sequence, and we included temporary roadblocks and safety components in order to add a more like context to the animation. Now this is the second interaction we exported, rendered. This is a dual view interaction. In this video, we can monitor different views of the same project. So we can follow SH170 activities at the right side of the screen and NT3C activities at the left side. So both are running the same schedule. So road projects can have like a long footprint. So if sometimes you use a single camera, then you can spot what's going on at the other side of the project. So you can have this kind of multi-camera, multi-view running the schedule at the same time. And this was exported from Synchro 4D at the same time. We didn't add different cameras like in the video editor or like in a different program. It's just a direct render. Yeah. As to recap, animations can focus in different parts of the project and run the schedule at the same time. You can get detailed visuals for specific parts of the project. Sometimes there's the road, the big road, but there are certain pieces of infrastructure in the middle that you can put some kind of tension and like watch them being built at the same time. And then finally, the third animation, that's schedule update comparison. So we are running two schedules at the same time in the program in order to be able to spot delayed activities and when do they start. The important thing about this is that we can spot changes between the schedules visually. So we can notice that the left side, like bridges, it's been built, but in the next update, those activities are delayed. We can spot too that the construction sequence, there are changes in the construction sequence, especially in the road construction sequence. So that could be a spot visually too, instead of trying to read a complex schedule. Sometimes you can spot that visually. That makes it like easier for the management team. Or sometimes you have like too many activities, like more than 1,000 activities, and then you can run a program in order to spot which changes have been done to the schedule, like in the next update. But because there are too many activities, then it's hard to know if that will impact the construction sequence in a certain way. So this could be a help to the team, to the project management team, to spot those activities. So this just is a recap. But the important part is that users can spot earlier started and delayed activities visually. I'm trying to be a visual help while comparing schedules. So this is just small feature compilation. You can get construction sequence, multi-view, schedule updates, a variable timeline. Sometimes there are like long activities, and they're like really short activities, like the bridge construction takes just near a month, but the whole project is more than a year. So you can change and alter the timeline scale for certain parts that you're interested or that you want to see. Then we can add camera movements and 3D object animations like the cranes and fail and objects that grow or like disappear between the activities. Also, there are modeling features like temporary sign. You can add like temporary facilities or like parts of the job site that then are going to disappear after the project's ended. Then you can add equipment, materials, excavation fill, and add realistic textures. Well, these are some potential setbacks we identified while using this 4D modeling process. And the first one I think is one, or maybe it's the most important, is that you need a 3D model ready. So sometimes you can get more objects or more 3D objects that you need in order to make the 4D model. So you have to clean it, you have to simplify some parts, you have to cut some objects before they are going to be exported, trying to preserve textures sometimes. And this is one of the most important parts, like to have clean, ready. And also, I put here like the manual resource assignment. So once you get the 3D objects and the schedule, then you have to make the match. Synchro, that's the program we are using, could turn this activity a little bit tedious because you have to manually link each task with the proper resources. Now, if we can if we want to do this in a faster way, we can try to assign some certain coding or some certain kind of number or some kind of naming convention to our 3D objects and then export them to an Excel chart and do that link through an Excel chart and then import in Synchro, and that will be like an automated process and will save us like a big time. We can like obtain this task assignment match in maybe a couple of days instead of spending like maybe a week if you have like too many 3D objects. Also, we have to consider texture edition compatibility because we imported objects from 3ds Max and we used a certain renderer, but then in order to use those objects in Synchro, they were using another kind of materials, so we had like some kind of clashes between them. So you have to be like sure which kind of materials you're using in 3ds Max before the export. And then other potential setback could be the task and level of development definition, because not all the activities that are in the schedules are going to be modeled, and not all the 3D objects are going to be modeled. So you have to start simplifying some activities or maybe discarding some 3D objects in order to make them look in the proper sequence, or like not trying to over animate activities that will not show they're not relevant for the animation. And finally, the WBS schedule uniformity. Since we were animating two projects, the two projects had two different schedules, but they were generated by two different companies. So they were using different standards for the WBS. And once we tried to generate the animation for the roads, we had different tasks for the same activity. So we had to agree in some parts and then discard other tasks in order to make them look uniform. This could be avoided sometimes if you implement a WBS standard that will consider a 4D model in the future, or like if it's going to be needed in the project. So you're thinking about activities that could be modeled instead of adding too much detail. So that's a part that could be implemented. And finally, there are future possibilities we are working on. As a team, we have plans to start using the 4D interactions to display the project TCPs, that are the traffic control plans. So we can spot opening, closure, and detour of the different road lanes along the project. So we can add like temporary ramps. We can then show lane reduction, and then when a road, like final road, is going to be ready, then we can remove temporary objects and then remove the temporary roads and do that kind of interaction. That's our that's where coordinating with Texas right now, because they want to see what's going to happen in other crossroads that they have. And our second plan is to move the 4D models into Lumen RT and get a VR interaction with the 4D model using a headset and watching the construction in real scale. So these two are the two applications of the 4D that we're planning to perform in the future. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Well, that was a great presentation, you guys. Really interesting work you're doing there. Do we have any questions from the audience today for Juan and Cameron? I have a couple I made up just to kind of spur discussion, but thought I'd ask you folks first.
So how long does it take you to develop how much work goes into developing the 4D model?
Yeah, that's the question that everybody asks. But yeah, thanks for asking. Once we got the 3D model ready, like 3D objects, like a standard 3D model, it took 6 to 7 weeks to get all this animation, schedule, task assignment, and everything else. So, and the 3D modeling, that will take around maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks. That would depend on how how nice you want your model to look, like which texture you're going to use, or maybe if you want to add, like, I don't know, lighting posts or like details, like some kind of I don't know, like sidewalks, etc. So that, but if you're going to keep it simple, maybe like 2 weeks of 3D modeling, and then we can reduce the 4D modeling, maybe 6 weeks or 5 weeks. Yeah, it's kind of like modeling and research at the same time, so that's why it takes a little bit more time. Yeah.
I mean, making it look pretty is exponentially harder. So you do get, the prettiness, but, like Juan talked about, the textures. Synchro has the ability to do like native cutting, for like different stationings or different, they're not gonna build the whole road at once. So you can do it in there, but if you want to, bring it from 3ds Max, you have to do that, you know, chopping up of roadway, you know, in 3ds Max so that your texture doesn't get messed up. The rendering, you know, takes longer, you know, in the iRay. So I would say that, you know, you have to weigh that cost benefit, and you know, that if you're talking to engineers, you know, the people are available and know where it is, you know, those features probably aren't necessary. If you're gonna go and try to, you know, talk to people that aren't familiar with the project occupation, or you know, the public that's, you know, wants to see those pavement markings, or you know, they want to see the traffic signs, then it's really worth it. But you gotta really want it. Like, that's what took us the longest, was because I kept pushing Juan. Like, gotta make it look pretty. Like, gotta make it look pretty, you know. And I think it does, but it, you know, getting the textures and the dash markings to look right, and the signs to look right.
So maybe as a follow-up to that, did you guys look at where it's being done commercially? Like, obviously you cranked it out for that particular project situation, but I believe this is being done, you know, in a lot of ways. So just curious if you looked at how others, like what their cost, what their, I don't know, best practices, or, and you know, how that works.
Like other people in the industry are doing.
Right.
Juan was in the industry. He, you know,
Okay.
he built, you know, improved a.
So in other words, you kind of incorporated what you knew as best practices.
Yeah, and also we had for the bridge animation, we had some communications with the actual team that wanted to perform the work. For crane locations. They had their temporary displays, and they assisted us in order to make some tweaks in order to show the beam manipulation and
Right.
and that stuff. So we can get support from the actual project, like construction team that is going to perform the work. Yeah.
Well, what was your experience when you were in Peru working on? You were the contractor.
Yeah, I work as a constructor. Yeah.
Did y'all do any of the fanciness, or what was your experience before when you were a contractor before?
We did the construction sequence for commercial buildings. We had a person in job site assisting us in order to get some quantities, and also to show the construction sequence to the people in the field, to the foreman and the workers, and they could identify like what are they going to perform next day and the next week, and that worked. I mean, people understood that, and they were more like they could understand what's the sequence. Sometimes they only perform what you say, but if you can show it in 3D, or like if you can show like the construction progress, they can like get more involved in like what's going to be done next 2 or 3 weeks. So, well, that's helpful.
I would say we also don't have, you know, as researchers, our goal is to, you know, push this out and explore these capabilities of, you know, on a real project. This is a real project. This is, you know, real data, real beams, real, you know, so it's not, you know, like the canned example. And so we, you know, I think there's more that 4D can do. I think also whenever you, when you like come at it together, like if you are a design build contractor and you're like, okay, we're gonna do 4D, and your scheduler is scheduling to support the modeling and they're talking, you know, but here, you know, it's just, you know, we're gathering stuff from, you know, our design build contractor on this side, and then there's the designer over there, and then the contractor has their schedule, and they're submitting schedules to get paid. And so it's, you're, you know, you're only as good as your data. And so, like, if you look in there, you'll see that NT3C is done before SH170. That is not the case. And that's because because we're taking the early start dates, but there's so much float on an NT3 side, 36C side that it's flipped. SH170 is done right now, and there's a big pile of dirt on NT3C. And so I think for 40 to be successful, that's where it's going to be the most successful, is where you are, saying you're going to do it.
Yeah. So I guess that means that the time that Juan is sharing is maybe not reflective of a pure project level usage of 4D.
Yeah, Juan's been doing this for 6 months.
Right, so it's kind of that mix of research. So I just wanted to kind of provide some context for that. Yeah.
I think that it's very valuable. I think Synchro, we've looked at, I think Synchro has a lot of capabilities. I think it's a good software. The updating is amazing. Like, you click one button, you can get the new schedule, and there's, if
keep
there's
the
new tasks,
relationships.
You have to do that. But I think Synchro is a really good, capable tool, robust enough to support that.
There's a question in the back, I think. Yeah.
Hey, Alex Ferrier, BGC Engineering. This is fantastic work. I'm not
Thank
an
you.
engineer, by the way. I am the former technical director of the video game Need for Speed. So when you said
Okay.
visual quality gets expensive,
Yeah.
yes. I had two questions. One was when you talk about your process of generating your 3D models, can you talk at all about, presumably the original design is in Civil 3D. Is that?
We were using Bentley products,
Okay.
but
okay,
it could be pretty similar. Yeah.
okay, so you have a source CAD design. To what extent was your 3D modeling process a sort of export, decimate, and touch up versus what did you have to remodel from scratch?
No, we modeled this from scratch from PDF plans that we got from the management, and we have to model like horizontal geometry for dimensions, profiles, and all the end conditions and everything. Yeah, it's from scratch.
Awesome.
So yeah, we were very vertically integrated, so we built everything from the ground up. But we originally designed I'll just add more on here. We originally started this modeling because there was some design conflicts, like, where they would come together. One was 4.5 feet above.
Yeah.
So we started out with a very detailed model to look at any, designs in 3D. So we did have to go back and do some changes, it's just also what you want to show and how much you want to show it, and what's important. Like at SH170, it's a big cut. So right now it's a greenfield project with frontage road, so it's a big cut. So we probably could have done some more to show like the impact of having that big cut, like something goes down really slow. Adding the beams and the animations there there is some. I guess there is some. And that's why I talked about ideally everyone's on board. We're gonna do 4D. The scheduler and the modeling team is talking and saying how but when you don't, there's obviously going to be some. But Synchro, Steen platform is helpful because, like I talked about, you can bring your 3D model in and then do your cutting up of sections, your phases. If you're not going to do fancy textures in Synchro, so you don't have to go back and do that.
Do you mind if I ask one more question? You talked about future developments. Since you now have a 3D model throughout time, is there any scope for integrating, say, drone photogrammetry, so you could have a daily as-built of what is the state of the project, and change detection between that photogrammetry and the expected state of the project in 3D?
Yes, we used one photogrammetry object. That's the surrounding, that's general surrounding. I can show this. So I don't think that would be a problem. We could add that. Where's this? Yeah, these we're showing like excavated material here, and then the surrounding is it's a tearing mesh that was obtained by photogrammetry. So if we can update that object, sure, we can do it, and then we could like show a construction sequence or like a construction progress using information from the field, like direct from the field. Yeah.
Awesome.
We
Yeah.
use a game for construction called Need for Speed. If you wanna follow up on that, I can see that becoming a game that we can make it more interesting, so.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there would be some work on that. I do think that, that probably Synchro probably does have the capabilities to bring those in. My biggest thing about 4D is it's like, you know, how do we show that flow? You know, we're putting out bad information like we are there, you know, technically the things are flipped. When one's done and one's not, it's just because we're taking the early start date. But it's interesting. It's good. Also, do you have any drones?
There's a question in the back. I think could be the last question.
Yeah, we'll make this our last question first.
I had a question about the version of the program. So you were saying you took everything from a PDF and modeled it. Were you using MicroStation inroads, the old school, or were you using OpenBridge?
We're using Open Road Designer and Open Bridge Designer for the bridge part. Yeah.
So did you strip out the textures from those? I guess like looking at it, it looks like it's a mesh with the concrete, and the grass, asphalt, and those
Oh,
visual parts taken out of it. It's more just like the top mesh.
yeah. The textures, materials. I can't remember the page. Polygon. I think that's page. That
All the textures and stuff.
that shows textures. Yeah.
Complicated process. We take it and we bring it into AutoCAD just to move it a little bit, and then we'll go to 3ds Max. So that's where you get all the texturing in from. Then you can go from 3ds Max into Synchro.
Okay.
So that's where you make it, you know, look pretty. But you know, traditionally we're using like V-Ray materials because that's what the best we can do render. That's the best we can do for rendering. You know, very common. But Synchro only supports like the standard material, so we literally had to go in and change all of our materials. And then Juan found out, oh hey, you know, like if you try to cut this with a 3ds Max, you know, textured object, you know, like they're cutting it, so you know we're gonna break it up into sections or you know like for you know size. It messes up your textures.
Is Synchro a Bentley product?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I've been doing some similar type of
They have
stuff.
FBX import. Right, Juan?
Hmm?
They have FBX import.
Yes. Once you get the 3D objects from the Open Roads, then you can export that, open it in 3ds Max as a DWG, and then assign textures, then export it as a FBX, and that's what Synchro can read. Yeah, and it will keep the textures if you do it right. Yeah.
You know if Synchro connects with Lumen RT? Can it?
Yeah.
I've been doing stuff with Open Roads into Lumen and then messing with it in Lumen, but we haven't done the 3ds Max, just like to keep all the textures as they come.
Yeah, Synchro can, well, you save as a SP file, and then you have to do, there's a procedure that you have to upload it into a web page, That's from Synchro 2. I think it's Synchro Control. And then you can open it in Luminar T through Synchro Control.
Thank you.
This is in quotes because we have not done it yet.
Yeah, we're in the
I know how
process
that
of
works.
doing that.
So, and that's part of our research is like, yeah, you say you can do this, but let's put it on a real project. Let's put it on, a complicated project and see if it works. And that's the great thing about research is we can have Juan dedicate 6 months to it. And we know this will provide benefits. And so, you're not gonna maybe do all this on one project, but you got a really big bridge, so you want to show that detailed bridge, to the public, because it's going to be closed and it's going to create a traffic nightmare. And, but the engineers don't need all that fancy 3S Max junk, so we just cut that out, so that saves you a bunch of time. You just go straight, you stay within that Bentley ecosystem, you're going to get a lot faster delivery.
Thank you.
Wow, excellent discussion. Let's give Juan and Cameron another round. All right, well, we're doing the computer switcheroo here. I see something like this that they're working on, and, I can imagine where construction information like that could feed into, a lot of agencies have like public-facing project progress dashboards and things like that. And I would think it would feed right into it. So just a thought. All right. Wow, that was fast. Okay, so next we have Jennifer Steen from HDR, and her talk is on 3D model-based design reviews. And Jennifer is the Highway and Local Roads BIM Director at HDR, and she brings a diverse perspective with a background in civil engineering, BIM visualization, and digital delivery. She applies insights from her experience as a design engineer and project manager to highlight opportunities for advancements in technology adoption and workflow integrations. So with that, let's welcome Jennifer.
Thank you. So my experience is all over the place. I'm a roadway designer, so that's where it all started, 3D modeling, and then getting into that visualization side of things. How do I explain my design intent? So I've always been into that. That's my passion project. My day job is digital delivery, getting everybody into the workflow and processes. So I've been coming to this conference, and this is my 3rd time, so I've always loved bridging that gap from the design and pushing it into the visualization side, and bringing that also back down to the designers too. Like, how do you get them to actually make these visualizations too? So I was trying to come up with the topic, and lately I've been doing a lot on 3D models, and this, now what do we do with these models and reviewing them? Because that's always the thing. So to start off, I have a bunch of things I was going to talk about in the next, maybe 35 minutes or so. Just going over, like, what is quality management? That's your QA, QC, going through that, because that's where your design reviews are taking place. We need to have an understanding of that. The different types of reviews that we're going to now need to be doing because we have these 3D models. And then what does that actually mean to do a model-based review? And some of the tools. If we have time, I can show you some of the Bentley tools that, just because that's what I have and I've been using. So to start off with, for everybody in the room, who do we have here? Do we have anybody who's a designer, who've designed 3D models before? Okay, we got a couple people, awesome. I know you've modeled things. How about, there's a lot of researchers here, right? Handful of research. Anybody ever have to, project managers? Okay, so you've had to review things before, probably on paper. Anybody else? Oh, vendors, right? We have some vendors here, maybe? Okay, so we have a nice mesh of people to go through. So usually when I do this, it's in front of a lot of designers, and so they're getting through from, where am I taking this planimetric point of view that I've been doing for many, many years? I've been always making my paper, and now you're forcing me to make these models? Like, okay. And they're like, so we go through, okay, we're gonna make these 3D models because it's gonna save you time later. You're putting all your data together, now you can visualize it, and then you can get your sheets out, you can get your data, you can get your information out and hand that over to another person. And you're like, that's gonna save time because it's your data exchanges all the way through. And they're like, okay, that's great, that's awesome, I'm gonna save time. And then the project manager comes back and says, how am I gonna check it? because I haven't opened CAD in 20 years. So how am I supposed to take a look at that model in the native software? And what does that actually mean? So now that you have all of this data that used to be on the plan sheets, now you're trying to figure out where is that. So what we need to do is, instead of taking PDFs and then modeling them and then putting it into your 4D model, I want to take my data throughout the life cycle of my project. And that's the dream, right? Someday we'll get there, but So in the beginning, when we're planning, we want to have really good survey. You get the drones, we get our terrain. So we're starting to build up our 3D platform to be able to model on top of. And through that planning, we can do alternative analysis. We can do some cool different tools that's out there. The different products, the software is out there to be able to make decisions very quickly and then visualize it rapidly. And that's really great. But then when we get into design, we're making these 3D models. We're putting a lot more information into that, but we need to take the data somehow. And sometimes it would be nice just to port it straight through. But in reality, software doesn't work like that. So the core is that I want to be able to take some data that I can extract and automate it in a way to be able to put into my design area. And then when I have that design, I have this 3D model. We kind of talked about it. What were these BIM use cases? So anybody heard the term BIM use cases before? Or use case of what we're doing? So what that means is, if I'm modeling something, I can't just model for the sake of modeling. I mean, I could, but you're only getting paid for so much. So you have to understand what you're modeling for. Am I modeling it for a 4D model? Am I modeling it to hand it over to the contractor for fabrication? Am I modeling it to give over to the visualization specialist to make a pretty video that we're going to win the public support? That's 3 different models, but it's all coming from that same information. So, but we want to be able to define what we're using our models for. So if we're handing that over then to the contractor, where you literally say, you do not get plans anymore, they're now having to use this model to bid off of and then construct from. But because of this talk is all about quality management, how do they know they're getting the quality in that model? How do they know that this has been checked, or that data or that information you're giving me is right? Because on the plans, I used to do this for years, right? I used to be able to look at it and then go through everything. So we want to understand that where our data is coming from, how good that data is, how to verify it, and then how to hand it over so that other people through that life cycle can actually use that data. So I know that there's a handful of different people around here. Does anybody wake up at night in the middle of the night and think, I can't review this model, or how am I going to do this? Maybe it's an underlying cause, maybe a subconscious nightmare that people have. But that's what's going on. People are trying to figure out, how am I going to review this new information that's being handed to me now visually instead of graphically or on paper, just with numbers to analyze. So is anybody doing any 3D reviews right now at all? Okay, what kind of reviews? Just project ones? Design?
Design reviews in ORD.
Okay. So you're getting into the native software. You have to have an understanding of open roads.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is only it's design in our design QC.
Yes.
We can't review it with partner yet.
So we're starting out, we're still in that native software. So that's where you are.
But also, just y'all are doing it. You can't share that model. You can't share that open design file with, you said, the client or partner?
Correct. Yeah, they don't have the capability to do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, is it capability or is it like a IP risk?
Bentley has some projects that are not quite ready for viewing without actually getting the software, but also we have some issues with not being able to use the cloud, which makes it harder to use their software.
So we can talk about that too. Yeah. I mean, that's my bit, but it keeps you up at night. To be going through this digital delivery transformation, we need, because we have so much data, we're going to have to be going to the cloud. And that in and of itself has its own issues, especially from an agency perspective of when you have statutes and limitations of saying you can't use the cloud. So yeah, I've been going through this with a number of different DOTs. I'm like, how do you be able to use this different software? And it's not even just for the design and the reviews. It's also some of this visualization software that's going to be going into the cloud because it needs that place to do it, because you can't do it on a basic laptop or a desktop. There's just no power there. So typically when you do reviews, usually you leave, your 2 weeks before, right, at the end of the project or the end of the submittal, and you're like, okay, we're going to get this in the review time. You're going to have 2 weeks to do it for the reviewers. It's going to be great. that never happens, right? It's always, oh, you'll get it to you tomorrow, we'll get it to you tomorrow, and then of course it's Friday night on a long weekend for a vacation or a holiday. And that's usually when you have to review it. So now your review times are being cut down because that's the traditional way that we've always looked at plans. So moving forward, we're gonna have to change that mindset and change when we're doing these reviews, how are we doing these reviews, and what are those outcomes. So next I'm just gonna talk about quality management in and of itself. So we're taking a look at quality management. That's your QA and QC put together, but we're gonna give it a nice big term. So what does this mean, right? Just as the umbrella, it's the act of overseeing activities and tasks that must be accomplished to maintain a desired level of excellence. That's pretty broad, right? Like that's a good definition of what we want to do. But now we need to define that process, right? Now we have these digital deliverables that we're creating, and that's actually becoming the contract deliverable. Like I'm handing you over your model and you're gonna use this model and that's what you're getting contractually paid for to use to build. And so now because of that, we now have to have a process and a standard developed to be able to check that. Because you might be getting those paper, you might not even getting paper or PDFs. You might be getting some information, but it's for information only. So everything's gonna be coming off of these models. And it's the dream, we'll get there. And people are doing it now, but like for the everyday, the standard that we wanna get to, that's where it's gonna be. So today I'm gonna focus on the design phase. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in construction. How do you look at those models? How do you look at it when you're bidding? So today I just wanna concentrate on the design side. We're making these models so the BIM use would be for a contractual handover, and that's what we need to start looking at. So types of reviews. I'm working with PennDOT right now, PennDOT, and we are looking at changing their digital delivery processes to, by 2025, have an entire process all the way through to be able to design and bid and construct with a 3D model. So now we're looking at how do we review these models? So how do people who have been doing this for 40 years on paper now get that model? And what does that look like? So we needed to define these different types of reviews for them because now we also have to define what they are, but what's included in each of these. Similar to what our regular reviews have been on paper. So we have design compliance reviews. How does our design comply with our model? And what does that look like? Then we also look at our model integrity. And that's just the integrity of that model itself in CAD, however that's made. So we want to be able to do that. We have external stakeholders, because it's not just roads and bridges, but we have stakeholders who might not ever be using these 3D models, such as right-of-way. Right-of-way plans are always, I feel like, going to be PDFs, mostly because the judges in the courthouses still have fax machines. So I don't think they're going to move away from that. So we're still going to have to be able to give our data over somehow and be able to change that into these paper plans for that reason. So we need to be able to make sure our models are checked for that along with these pieces of paper. Permits might still be in that 2D sphere, but we're going to be pulling that data from that 3D model. And they actually want to visualize it when they're out in the field. They want to see what their impacts are, but the actual data to be able to actually certify it, I think is still going to be in that 2D area. And then the deliverables. Always checking your deliverables. When you have a plan set, you always have an intern go through and check every page, make sure one's not upside down, right? You always have something like a blank page where there's all of a sudden there's a streak across that got printed on. That same check needs to happen with our deliverable or digital deliverables, whether it's a DGN file, whether it's a DWG file, whatever's in that file or that export needs to be checked in and of itself. And what is that process? Does someone have to go open it or all of that? So there's a bunch of key factors when we're thinking about these different design reviews. We need to identify who's reviewing it, where they're reviewing it. Is it going to be on a tablet? Is it going to be in the cloud? Is it going to be at home? Are they going to be sitting next to each other? They have to define, what are you reviewing? As a specific thing, today I need to review this model, but why? What is my job to do? And then also, when are you reviewing it? Are you doing these reviews weekly? Is it at the submittal times right before? Is it every day? And that's going to change how your reviews are done and what you're looking for. But also, who's reviewing it? It used to be just the project manager or the task lead. Well, now we might start needing to have different roles put in place or responsibilities that are now identified. We might be having a model manager where that's their job is to put these models together, but that's their job to review it too. So we're going to either get new jobs or you're adding to your own role, or you might be reviewing something that you never got to review before that were on paper plans, especially with these different softwares. So next I wanted to dig into each of those reviews and kind of explain them a bit more. Now that you're thinking about the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why, what does this mean? So this is what we're kind of defining. We're playing around with this for the design compliance. And we're making this pretty broad. So when you're doing a design compliance review with these models, the first one is the design criteria. And it's the same thing. When I designed my road to put on paper, I was still using the design manuals. I have to make sure it's meeting that criteria. So when your model, you want to make sure it's meeting the criteria. Is my lane widths proper? Is that meeting like the 45 miles per hour? And then the different types of road classifications. So that's all those calculations. Is my super elevation correct? Is my bridge piers all done and analyzed? So making sure that criteria is checked based off of different guidelines. And this is usually done by the project manager. So now your project manager is going to have to be able to get into some type of software, however they're going to review this data. And then it's going to typically happen at the milestones. So you're going to be designing, and along the way you're going to hit 30, 60, 90, and turn that in. And that's when your project manager is probably going to go in and need to conform that, and that needs to be certified. That's usually a typical audit check mark that we like to do. So then when we start looking at constructability, that's the fun one, right? Where you're taking all the different disciplines and seeing if it's going to be staged properly or constructed properly. And that might happen in a different software product. And it could be done either the project manager or the design team in and of itself. That's when you really get down and you sit there and look at it. And that's where the visualization side comes in. And that's where you're going to see a lot more gain in finding these issues, because now you can see it. Usually on those 2D plans, when you're like, wait, turn back. I've sat in a constructability review where they actually flip back and forth between PDFs last week. And I was like, if you just open the model, you could see this, like, please. It's gonna make it so much easier to understand and faster. So the faster we can understand things, the more time we can spend doing other things. And typically, usually the constructability might only happen once every so often, but what we wanna do is start having that more often. And so the way that we have our models is when we're updating them, we can have it in, one place and just update that model, and people can keep reviewing it every week, and you can keep looking at the same information. It's not that you'd have to create a whole new model just because you changed one thing. You can constantly be looking at it. So that's the dream, is to live in just a single source of truth of your model and then updating it based on your comments. And then the interdisciplinary type of review is looking at the clashes and the conflicts between those disciplines, which is a little bit different than constructability. It's taking a look at where my utilities are. Am I going to be hitting, am I popping out of the middle of the road? Is the bridge going to be too low? And so you need to have these clashes, and that can either happen in the native software or in some other types of software too. And so that type of review can happen more often than not. You want to be doing that throughout your design process. And that's usually going to be done through a project team interaction. Then next up is model integrity. And this is where the fun part comes in. So you have this beautiful 3D model, and now you need to check it. And so that geometric integrity means comparing your model that you've built, and spent a lot of time on, because that's what, as modelers, we love to do that, but comparing it to the information that you're designing for. So your typical sections. Is my 12-foot lane actually 12 feet? Is my 4-to-1 slope all 4-to-1? Usually you would cut cross sections all the way through, and you could just look at those and then verify that and check that off. But now with these models, there's going to be tools that are going to be created that you could run through and automatically see if there's an issue. If you put these parameters in, that's where the design review software is going to be. It needs to be going, right? We need to automate these processes, because if we want to do these quality reviews more often, I need to automate this. I need to be able to put my parameters in and then push it out. But I need to check that integrity of my model in and of itself. And so that's going to happen mostly either through the design authoring software or the review software done by the design leads. So your bridge group is going to be doing that. The utilities and drainage group is going to look at theirs, and everybody's going to look at their individual models before they get put together. So model development, this might be a new term for a lot of people, is how do you define your different model elements at different stages of the project, right? So in the beginning of a project, it's not going to be 100% modeled. You're going to have a lower level of development. They're going to be, maybe just squares or something very basic, conceptual. And then over time, you're going to add more information and detail into that. But at the end of the day, You know, I could model something and you could model something and we could be doing it completely different and come up with the same design and the same design is intent, but our models are going to have different levels of information if we don't have a standard. So we want to have a standard to say at 90%, your model should have these elements and they should have this much minimum information or detail in there. And so when you define that, now as a reviewer, you have a checklist. You have an easy checklist. Is that matching? No. Redo that. You know, like, and so now you have something to check against. If not, you're just looking at the model and saying, that looks pretty good. I could probably, you know, they'll figure it out in the field, right? They'll figure it out in the field. There's no contractors here, right? Okay. They'll figure it out in the field. But if we have our models defined and we're able to hand off that, you know, manual and say, this is what it's supposed to be at 30, 60, 90, and hand it over to the contractor and say, this is what's exactly in the model and this is what you're getting, that's great. You're going to be able to do things with that information. It's verifiable and then it's reliable so that data can actually be used instead of thrown away and then the contractor goes and makes their own model and then their own 4D model, even though you spent 6 months doing it yourself. But yes, so that's what the new term is coming in. We're going to be looking at defining how we're modeling and what level of development that we want to be. So that's its own check. And that information is probably going to be done in that design software. So you're going to need someone who's highly capable and trained in, you know, open roads and Civil 3D and some modeling software, CAD software, and be able to look through that. But we can also automate that process too. So that's going to be a type of review in and of itself. And then modeling standards, and this, we're trying to move away from just CAD. You're modeling now. We're not drafting anymore. We're not drawing things. We're modeling things. So modeling standards is every agency has its own naming convention, and they have their own colors and their own styles and their own line weights and element templates, but that still needs to be followed. There's a whole naming convention there too. And the reason why is if you're following these standards, we can now apply that 4D example instead of you having to go and track back everything. If that's already all built into the model, when that's handed over, someone else can take that and then switch up the 4D modeling through that. So that's why it's so important to make sure your models are meeting those standards. The naming conventions are correct. Because how many times have you gotten a model and it's like, or a point that you're looking at a break line and that's break line 0? That means nothing to me, right? I want to say edge of pavement or the center line or something else. The curb would be nice. I'd like to know what that actually is. So we need to be checking our models for these standards. And then again, just going back over those external stakeholders, you know, it's probably going to be done, especially if you're looking at a 3D model with external stakeholders, it's probably through a design software. They're not going to be getting into CAD. They don't have the licenses, and that's another issue. Not only the cloud, but it's how much does this stuff cost? Because it's always about the money and the time. So we have to be looking at our external stakeholders, especially utility companies, like they're not in the software products like the designers are every day as engineers. So how do we help them still review that information in a way that they can understand it and verify it and feel like, and you know, actually say that this is correct, you can go build this, or you can go dig up my road or my gas line, it's gonna be fine. And then just those deliverables, reviewing those exported information, if it's a land XML, someone needs to re-import that just to look at it. Make sure it's not a blank file. And you can automate that too. Yep.
Jen, is the modeling person a modeling person, or is the PE that's responsible for the design?
To check it?
No,
Or just a creator? It could be,
Is the engineer creating the model, or is someone else creating the model, you know?
it could be either. It depends on the project too.
I guess what do you see?
Both.
Okay.
So it depending as we're moving forward, especially on these different projects that are happening. I've been on a project where just the way that it was a design build very quickly, and we had a small compact team. I was the modeler. I mean, I am an engineer too, so I could design it, but we just didn't have the time. There was someone designing and making those design decisions, and I was modeling it and trying to get that all to work in and of itself, because we didn't have enough time to design and model together. But on other projects, as the PE too, like I've modeled the entire thing and designed it while I'm doing it together. So it really depends on your project, who you have, and who's capable of doing it. But checking it, it's got it in the PE coming back. You're gonna be looking at, as a person who's gonna be sealing these models, how do you review it so that you can verify that? So.
I guess I was wondering, like, that additional step.
Mm-hmm.
Is needed, you know, if
and sometimes you might not have a PE, and you might just be the modeler. But then the person who has the PE is going to be checking it because they're going to be sealing it for that.
Did
So.
you say that's kind of the QC, QA? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so like
That's the QA, really, is that independent?
yeah, the check behind it.
Yeah.
And then we could be doing over the shoulder checks. There's different ways to do this. And I think we have to be agile in that too, as your projects are going on, and how do you make sure that these models are reviewed? So it's going to be it's a new frontier. So going back, we have to look at our review needs, and we have to look at what our designers are doing. So when we're taking a look at it, our current needs is we need a checklist and we need a set of plans. And if I have a checklist and a set of plans, I can check it. And I can go through and I can verify that my plan is correct, and then hand that back. That's put in a drawer for the auditing that happens every year. And everybody gets signed off, everybody stamps it, and the check mark who checked, accepted, and changed everything. But now in the future, what we're looking at is now we need to be able to navigate these 3D models with the 2D digital information too. Because there's still going to be tables, there's still going to be reports, and there's still going to be this other information that you have. So how are you going to be comparing the two, and what does that look like? You're going to also have to have people who are familiar with this applications, all this different software that's out there. People are going to have to start learning this and training. So how do you teach someone who's been 40 years on the job, who has only seen plans and now hasn't touched like a computer or a software application before? What does that training look like? Because that's completely different in and of itself. How often do you have this training? How often do you have to have these conversations? So we're doing that actually at PennDOT right now. Like, how do we, and it's hard, it's difficult, how do we get them to actually open the file, to like look at it, to be able to review it? But they also are looking at it, they're like, I only have 2 hours to review this, so how am I supposed to do the same job that I used to do in the same amount of time? So these are the social and the people issues that we're looking at too, because it's not just the software or your models. And then also just the time. We still need to be being just as efficient. We need to be getting these jobs out. That's how we're getting paid. So we need to have the tools there and the standards and the checklists together to be able to do all of this. So now those were the reviewer things, and now what about the designers and modelers, right? Like, so now what are the new things that the modelers are going to have to do to put into these 3D models? They're going to have to start putting more quantity information on these elements. Before it used to be the bubbles or calls out on plans and people can count them. Now it's all coming into the elements. So now you're going to have to be in the native software, and that's where on the Bentley side it's the workspace, building it out. In Civil 3D, it's the same thing as like your pay items getting in there. How do you start tagging this additional information? Now the goal is that when you're 3D modeling, you're building it from the beginning and you keep adding on. So instead of spending all your time making cross sections, which usually would happen, and just recut cross sections over and over and over again, and that's where the 100 hours per sheet would come into play, you're going to be spending that time now instead putting that information into your model. So there's going to be a change of tasks for our designers and modelers. We still need to be able to mimic the plan views, such as like the typical sections, but now we're doing them in the model in and of itself. But all that information that's on those typical sections needs to be in my model. So I can't just put like, oh, that slope looks fine, it's fine. It's not fine. Like, it needs to be 4:1. It needs to be defined, and you need to know exactly where those transitions are. And then we still have that tabular data. And before, I used to hand type. You'd get the report out, and then you hand type it into the CAD and the draft, and then someone would check that, and hopefully you didn't transpose something. Now we can extract that data from our models, which is what we want. I want to be able to have my model and get my alignment data. Or if there's right-of-way, that's all drawn out properly, I want to be able to export that and put that into a report somehow. But these reports and this tabular data now, it has to be usable, right? Like, I want to be able to put that data and port it into maybe my machine guidance. So you have to be able to use this data. It can't just be static on like a flattened PDF. That's not helping anybody. I want to be able to search, tag, use, future. Like, it's gonna be great. So this is just an example. We still have a couple minutes before, but I'll keep pushing through. So the things that we need to be looking at now is that export too. So it's the dream. You'll be tagging all this information onto your models, and then you're gonna be able to export those pay items and item types and pushing that towards that bidding system. So that import-export, we're cutting out some of these steps in between. So that's going to be important for our designers to start looking at as we move towards these different design reviews. I think this is a video. So one of the biggest things too, with our reviewers who are not in these native software packages, they still want those views, just like you had the detail views. Like I want to know where my typical sections are, things that you used to see in the plans. How do we now show it to the reviewers? And the one thing that we found is, I think I should show it, are saved views. So in Bentley software, you're going to be able to create these saved views so that when you open that file as a project manager, I can see which ones I want to look at. I need to check, I'm like, where's all my concrete? Where are we doing that? I can have a saved view that you immediately click on, so you're not clicking on every button. Because that's scary. Project managers never opened a CAD file before. You see all those buttons up there? That's daunting. And you close the project already, right? Like, you're like, I'm done. But having the ability to very quickly open something and look at it with these saved views, that's where we're going. So in these saved views on the DGN files, you're going to be able to port that into the design review software too. And I think keep going. Yes. So now when you're looking at that tabular data and you want to review it, instead of having a printout or an export, you're going to be able to do this in a design review software. Yes, it's in the cloud. But you're going to be able to click on it, and I still want to be able to get that report. So when we're looking at design review software products out there, we want to be able to like find all of this information the same way I did on paper. So going through very quickly, how to review this. So what is needed for these model reviews? Now we have our models, we have our standards in place, maybe we have this checklist. What do we need to do? The goal is to have this real-time collaboration and issue tracking. That's what we're going to need with our 3D models. Because if you're each looking at the same 3D model, but you're not in the same file, or you each have it on your own desktop, you're all going to make similar comments. It happens all the time on paper plans, right? You come back, and then as you know, the intern, I had to go type them all in. I'm like, wait, they're all the same comment. Yes, I know I misspelled that word. Thank you. So to be able to not do that, we need to be in a real-time collaborative and issue tracking place so that we can take a look at that. For these model reviews, the clash detection and constructability reviews, we're going to need the capability to do that and be able to put in the parameters and check that. And we want to be able to interrogate those models to identify any information found all over the place. So I want to be able to either run a script or look for something, search it. Where is it in my model to do this? So that's what we want to have our review software be able to do. And then I want to be able to extract element data. I need to be able to check quantities. Quantities are the biggest thing, right? That's, at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at. And so if we verified it through calculations, I need to be able to verify that in my model too, very easily. So we've touched upon this really quickly, but where do we review these 3D models? And there's going to be a variety of places that we're going to be doing it. It's not a one-stop shop. And the different types of reviews that we've already covered, they're all going to happen in different ways. So you can be in your native software. You can be in a model viewer where it's just a free 3D viewer just to get some of that information, and design review software. And that's what's coming out within the industry right now. So I think I have a couple quick minutes, but this is, has anybody seen iTwin Design Review? It's a Bentley product. Okay, there's a couple. So what this is in the ProjectWise 365 area, so it's in the cloud. But what you're able to do is you're able to either connect your models from ProjectWise or be able to upload models, and it could be DGN or DWGs or all sorts of information, and to make it a federated model. So anybody heard federated model before? Okay, so some people haven't, but what that means is I'm taking all my model information and putting it into one model. And sometimes you can view that in a container file or something else. So we have our model, we have our information, and you're able to go through and very easily, as a reviewer, if you've never been in the CAD software, this looks a lot nicer, right, than that Open Roads one, right? It's not as intimidating. And the way that they've made this software, so it's very useful. You have your navigation, you have your certain review tools, reports, different saved views. All the saved views you made in your DGN files are there now. So a reviewer can come in and say, where's my bridge abutment? And click on it, and it would take you right there in the model. So you're able to still see that, replicate that similar process that you used to do with your sheets when they would look through and look for the abutment detail. Now you would see the same information there, and then you can click on things and interrogate it there. So that's what the software does. And I have a bunch of videos, but we can go through if you want to see them later. But it's, I think as I talk and play, you have this information, you can turn things on and off, you can put in a 30% model, you can keep adding to these models over time and being able to go and look through the different tools that are there. And so one of the things with working with Bentley is like, I can sit there and be like, I really need super elevation. Where's my super elevation? Give me tools to do this. And so as we start going through as an industry, we need to start telling our vendors, I used to be able to find this information. Give me a way to do that now. How do I get those reports? How do I get those quantities? How do I interrogate something and quantify it? So we need to keep building up these tools and making sure that they work too, because that's helpful. So we have a bunch of videos, and the way that we're doing this with PennDOT is that we've created these videos so people can now get trained, and then they go back to them later. Especially being in now this virtual kind of world and doing things remotely, it's how do we go and train our people, train those reviewers to do these things. So we're finding that it's a lot of talking, it's a lot of presentations, just getting out there and teaching people. And we're actually making sandboxes once we do get that cloud usage, maybe. I think we got it. That they're able to actually go in there and play around before they actually get a project that they have to review, because you need to first see it. And then you need to actually be able to get into something and play around before you actually feel comfortable enough to do it on a project. So training is huge. And how do you train people? And you're going to be doing this in different ways. And if we had more time, I'd talk about social sustainability and how that turns into the equity that we need for training. So there's a lot going on with these design reviews, and it's a lot to figure out, not only for a project, but for an agency to figure out what they want to check off and say. So those were just some fun videos. And then I think I have a summary video. Oh, yes. And so in design review, you can also assign issues, and that's where that collaborative piece comes. Everybody gets into the same project and is able to look around and then toggle things, and that can all be tied back if it works correctly. So, but yes, so just quickly in summary, we need to be defining what our collaborative design reviews look like and what that means to everybody in this room. It's going to mean something different to each of them. We need to be defining responsible parties and telling, you are in charge of this review, so you need to have this training, you need to be doing this. This is now your responsibility or your job or your role, because that is going to change. And then at the core, for any of this stuff, any of the things, the visualization things we see, we need to be helping our designers model better and model what they need to be and modeling clean. So that's the biggest takeaway I've always been talking about for how many times have I been here? 3 years? So it's creating that model setup, and then you're going to be able to review it at some point once you make it. Yes, thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Clock on the wall up there is a little bit fast. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions? No?
The one in the back.
One in the back.
So the traditional way of putting together plans, a lot of times the modeling was not perfect. There's a lot of fudge this intersection. It doesn't have to match up exactly. Now going into giving the contractor a set of weekends or whatever the deliverable is, they're going to be having all that to build off of. How is PennDOT dealing with that? Basically like the extra level of modeling that needs to go in, the costs associated with that.
Yeah, so the costs and the time, it's coming out, we're not putting cross-sections in the plans. So all that time to make those cross-sections aren't there. So that's where that time savings goes. So what we're doing, we're piloting in different ways. So right now we're doing roadway pilots, and then there'll be bridge and utility. So we're building off each one. So right now it's just handing over the earthwork. So those models, it just has a level of development for to be able to do like automated machine guidance. So we actually had to sit down. We had bi-weekly meetings with the design teams and saying, show me your model. And we're like, there's a hole there that work through this. And so we would have to work through with the modelers and designing it and saying, like, we need this, like, how are you going to do your brake lines? Because they were only needing to export out that top surface. But you still have to have that top surface. So it's actually learning some more advanced modeling techniques to be able to do this stuff.
So that is the expectation, is that you're kind of creating a
Yeah.
clean model with contractors.
Yep. And the files have to be clean too. Like, you can't have scrap little things over here or there, and then yeah, it's a much more detailed process too.
Are they seeing it then as a time savings overall?
Right now, it's not, just because it's a learning process too, and so it's new standards and new ways of working. So it's taking the same amount of time, And in doing this, though, we're seeing our own issues that are popping up. But because we see an issue on a project, we can now pass that to the next pilot project. So we have 12 total, and then 13, 14 maybe coming along the way. So
Yeah, maybe that ends up affecting construction, avoiding change orders.
yeah, so that's the goal, is to avoid those change orders, to have better estimates to pass that over. So we need to pilot, though, and be able to see what the contractor's actually going to be using. Even though they say they could use it, we want to see if they actually did. So that's the...
All right. Excellent. I have a quick question
Sure.
for you. You know, realizing that, you know, your presentation was focused on the planning phase, maybe kind of thinking about, you know, the bigger picture down the road, you know, maybe even moving towards like digital twins, right? What are your thoughts on the, you know, quality management tools and methods you talked about today being used in other phases, like O&M, for instance, you know, perhaps where there is no deliverable per se, you know, maybe your recipient is like your maintenance crew. I don't know, just an open-ended question.
Talk about like the digital twin. If you had a digital twin that you were keep putting information into, you would need your own set of criteria to check that against. And then you wouldn't probably be using the design tools. You'd probably be having another software product or application to use for that. I don't think you're going to find one application that's going to do it for everybody. You just can't. You can't. There's just not enough software engineers out there to do all that. So I think it's finding the right product for the right tool in the right instance that we're going to have to be looking at. We're just going to need to be able to take that data, that model, and be able to import it to each of these different aspects. And that's where, you know, we can talk about open data standards another time. But yeah, I think it would be a different set of tools, but a similar process in that you'd have to check what quality of that information coming in and building it. Because if you don't check that, then what's the use of that digital twin?
Right.
So.
Okay. Well, that brings us to noon, to lunchtime.
It's lunch.
You know, I thank everybody for being here and you know, asking great questions, and thank you very much once again to our presenters for some excellent talks today. So enjoy the rest of your conference, and let's give our presenters another round of applause. Thank you very much.